Dear students, good afternoon. I welcome you to online counseling session on English fiction as part of MA English program BA 6 BA 6 semester being organized by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University. In this 6 semesters course American fiction, so in English fiction, we have been discussing of late the origin and development of novel as a new genre. We looked at 18th century novel and to text prescribed in the course, Robinson Crusoe and Joseph Andrews. After that, we also looked at 19th century novel in which we discussed Pride and Prejudice and Hard Times. After that, we moved on to 20th century fiction, where we at length talked about modernism and different characteristics of modernism. In the last class, we talked about Mrs. Dalloway, a novel written by Virginia Woolf. In this class, I am going to talk about 20th century American fiction and at the same time F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. So first thing first, we know that World War I and later World War II have had great impact on society in general and literature in particular. This is the century, the 20th century, which saw two different world wars and also a disintegration of USSR as events of global importance. Now, important movements in drama, poetry, fiction, and criticism took shape in the years before, during, and after World War I. The eventful period that followed the war left its imprint upon books of all kinds. Literary forms of that period were extraordinary, and in drama, poetry, fiction, the leading authors tended towards radical technical experiments. Let's look at the experiments, especially uh, in fiction. Though there were experiments in drama as well as poetry, but as relevant to this course, English fiction, we will see how these great events have impacted the 20th century fiction. The little magazines that helped the growth of the poetry of the era also contributed to our development of its fiction. They printed daring or unconventional short stories and published attacks upon established writers. For example, The Dial, Little Review, Seven Arts, and others encouraged modernist innovation. More potent were two magazines edited by the ferociously funny journalist come critics, H.L. Mencken, The Smart Set, and American Mercury. A powerful influence and a scathing critique of Puritanism, Mencken helped launch the new fiction. Mencken's major enthusiasms included the fiction of Joseph Conrad and Theodore Dreiser, but he also promoted minor writers for their attacks on gentility such as James Branch Cabell, or for their revolt against the narrow, frustrated quality of life in rural communities, including Zona Gale. The most distinguished of these writers was Sherwood Anderson. His Winesburg, Ohio, and The Triumph of the Egg were collections of short stories that showed villagers suffering from all sorts of phobias and suppressions. Anderson, in time, wrote several novels, the best being Poor White. In 1920, critics noticed that a new school of fiction had risen to prominence with the success of books such as F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Side of Paradise and Sinclair Levi's Main Street. Fictions that tended to be frankly psychological or modern in their unsparing portrayals of contemporary life. Novels of the 1920s were often not only lyrical and personal, but also in the despairing mood that followed World War I, apt to express pervasive disillusionment of the post war generation. Novels of the 1930s inclined towards radical social criticism in response to the miseries of the Great Depression, though some of the best, by writers such as Fitzgerald, William Faulkner, Henry Roth, and Nathaniel West, continued to explore the modernist vein of the previous decade. The three important writers of 20th century American fiction were Hemingway, Faulkner, and Steinbeck. Three authors whose writing showed a shift from the disillusionment were Ernest Hemingway, William Faulkner, and John Steinbeck. Hemingway's early short stories and his novels, The Sun Also Rises and A Farewell to Arms, were full of the existential disillusionment of the lost generation expatriates. The Spanish Civil War, however, led him to espouse the possibility of collective action to solve social problems, and his less effective novels, including To Have and Not and Have Not, and For Whom the Bell Tolls, embodied this new belief. He regained some of his form in The Old Man and the Sea, and his posthumously published memoir of Paris Between the Wars, A Movable Feast. Hemingway's writing was influenced by his background in journalism and by the spare manner and flat sentence rhythm of Gertrude Stein, his Paris friend and a pioneer modernist, especially in such works of hers as Three Lives. His own great impact on other writers came from his deceptively simple, stripped down prose, full of unspoken implication, and from his tough but vulnerable masculinity, which created a myth that imprisoned the author and haunted the World War II generation. Hemingway's great rival as a stylist and myth maker was William Faulkner, whose writings was a barbaric, was a baroque as Hemingway's was spare. Influenced by Sherwood Anderson, Herman Melville, and especially James Joyce, Faulkner combined stream of consciousness techniques with a rich social history. Works such as The Sound and the Fury, As I Lay Dying, Light in August, Absalom, Absalom, and the Hamlet were parts of unfolding history of Yokna County, a mythical Mississippi community which depicted the transformation and the decadence of the South. Faulkner's work was dominated by a sense of guilt going back to the American Civil War and the appropriation of native lands. Though often comic, his work pictured the disintegration of the leading families, and in later books such as Go Down Moses and Intruder in the Dust, showed a growing concern with the troubled role of race in Southern life. Now, Steinbeck's career, marked by uneven achievements, began with a historical novel, Cup of Gold, in which he voiced a distrust of society and glorified the anarchistic, individualistic, typical of the rebellious 1920s. He showed his affinity for colorful outcasts, such as the paisanos of the Monterey area in the short novels Tortilla Flat, Of Mice and Men, and Canary Row. His best books were inspired by the social struggles of migrant farm workers during the Great Depression, including the simply written but ambiguous strike novel In Dubious Battle, and his flawed masterpiece, The Grapes of Wrath. The latter, a protest novel punctuated by prose poem interludes, tells the story of the migration of the Joarts, an Oklahoma Dust Bowl family, to California. During their almost biblical journey, they learn the necessity for collective action among the poor and downtrodden to prevent them from being destroyed individually. Well, we know that the writers Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Faulkner are three important figures in American fiction, 20th century American fiction. Now, what we will do is we will look at some of the important characteristics of 20th century American fiction or literature in general. Well, so if we want to have a high level overview of 20th century American fiction, so let's start with this brief, short description of 20th century American fiction. 20th century American fiction is marked by its diversity, experimentation, and engagement with complex social and political themes. Writers explored a range of styles from realism to modernism, reflecting the changing landscapes of the United States and its cultural anxieties. Key themes include the American dream, class struggle, racism, gender inequality, and the impact of technological advancement. So, the American writers, especially the fiction writers, were focused on some key themes in their works, including the American dream, class struggle or racism, gender inequality, and the impact of technological advancements. So coming to some key features and developments. Modernism is at the root of 20th century literature, especially fiction. Modernism has been a major force. It rejected traditional forms and embraced experimentation, often exploring themes of alienation and disillusionment. If you recall, we had a long discussion on modernism and different characteristics of modernism in our earlier class. Now, another key feature of 20th century American fiction was realism and naturalism. Building on the foundations of earlier realism, 20th century authors continued to explore social issues and the impact of industrialization and urbanization. Similarly, the rise of genre fiction, such as science fiction and detective novels, gained traction during the 20th century period, reflecting the growing popularity of mass marketed fiction. And also, this century saw a flourishing of diverse voices, including those of marginalized groups who challenged dominant narratives and explored their own experiences. Notable writers of 20th century American fiction are F. Scott Fitzgerald, whose The Great Gatsby explores the disillusionment of the Jazz Age and the American dream, which we will take up for discussion later in this counseling session. Then we have Ernest Hemingway, known for his minimalistic style and exploration of war, loss, and masculinity. Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises and A Farewell to Arms are seminal works. We have another writer, William Faulkner. Faulkner's novels, including The Sound and the Fury and As I Lay Dying, delve into the complexities of the South and its history. We have John Steinbeck. Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath and Of Mice and Men offer powerful portrayals of the Great Depression and the plight of migrant workers. Similarly, we have Toni Morrison's from the late 20th century period. Morrison's novels, such as Beloved, explore the enduring impact of slavery and the African American experience. So, with this general overview of 20th century American fiction, let us directly jump to uh, the text from this era, The Great Gatsby. Now, what one can find in F. Scott Fitzgerald's novel, The Great Gatsby. Before we jump into a comprehensive discussion of the novel, I would like to give a high level overview of key themes, aspects in the novel. In fact, Great Gatsby is a profound and enduring work of literature that explores the complexities of human desire, the allure and disillusionment of the American dream, and the decay of moral values in a rapidly changing society. Now, the question is, what is this American dream and why it is so important that it has, often become the theme in many of the works of literature. So let us quickly understand what is this American dream. In fact, American dream is a century old phrase used to describe the idea that anyone can achieve success in the United States through hard work and determination. This idea of the American dream is a deeply ingrained national ideal in the United States, referring to the belief that anyone, regardless of their background, can achieve success and prosperity through hard work, determination, and initiative. It's a vision of upward mobility where individuals can improve their lives and achieve their goals. In fact, in fact, the phrase American Dream was popularized by James Truslow Adams during the Great Depression in 1931 and has had different meanings over time. Originally, the emphasis was on democracy, liberty, and equality, but more recently has been on achieving material wealth and upward social mobility. Tenets of the American dream originate from the Declaration of Independence, which states that, and I quote, all men are created equal, quote ends, and have an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The belief in the American dream is often inversely associated with rates of national disillusionment. Some, some critiques have said that the dominant culture in America focuses on materialism and consumerism or puts blame on the individual for failing to achieve success. Others have said that labor movement is significant for delivering on the American dream and building the middle class. Now, we had a fair a definition and understanding of what American dream is. Now, uh, let us go and look at the summary of this novel. What this novel is all about and what all we can find in in the novel. Okay, so I shall start with this text. Well, let's have a plot summary first. The Great Gatsby is concerned with the disillusion of the era following World War I. James Katz, from miserable surroundings, rises by sinister business dealings to great wealth, masquerading under the name of J. Gatsby. Katz lives mysteriously in a mansion on Long Island, where he entertains lavishly with his ill-gotten gains. Gatsby persuades his former mistress, Daisy, to live with him again. Daisy's husband had as his mistress Myrtle Wilson. Daisy, driving Gatsby's car, runs over Myrtle, killing her instantly. Daisy is now back in the good graces of her husband. Wilson, the garage man husband of Myrtle, traces the yellow car belonging to Gatsby, which had killed his wife. The garage man shoots Gatsby and then himself. The great Gatsby's funeral was only attended by his one friend, Nick, his aged father, and one curiosity seeker. This is the plot that unfolds itself in 9 chapters. Fitzgerald has often been called the novelist of manners, descending from Henry James and Edith Wharton. In this context, a statement by Henry James about writing about American society may be remembered that he did not offer the novelist a fertile enough soil for the cultivation of his art. One wonders to what extent this is relevant in the context of Fitzgerald. Okay, so let me give you a chapter-wise, briefest possible summary of The Great Gatsby, and then we'll go on to talk about other important aspects of the novel. In the summer of 1922, Nick Carraway moves to East West Egg, a lavish area in Long Island, home of the so-called New Rich. After an awkward dinner with his cousin Daisy, her husband Tom, and their friend Jordan Baker, Tom and Daisy hint that Nick should pursue Jordan romantically. Once home, Nick sees his neighbor Gatsby reaching out toward the water, but all Nick sees is a distant green light. On their way into New York City, Nick and Tom stop at George Wilson's garage, located on the edge of the Valley of the Ashes, to pick up Wilson's wife and Tom's lover, Myrtle. Tom, Nick, and Myrtle proceed to have an impromptu party at Myrtle's sister Catherine's apartment with her neighbors. The party grows increasingly wild as the group continues drinking, but it is abruptly ended after Tom breaks Myrtle's nose for talking about Daisy, leaving Nick in turn to take a train back to West End. Nick attends a party at Gatsby's mansion where he runs into Jordan. The two overhear numerous rumors and fantastic stories concerning Gatsby, such as him having graduated from Oxford and once having killed a man in cold blood. Later, Nick meets Gatsby and remarks that Gatsby doesn't drink and prefers to separate himself from the festivities. After, Nick explains that there is more to his life than attending parties, and he proclaims that although Jordan is dishonest, he is still attracted to her. While driving Nick into the city for lunch, Gatsby relates to Nick a series of stories about his life and accomplishments that Nick finds apocryphal and unrealistic. At lunch, Nick meets a shady associate of Gatsby named Mayor Wolfsheim, which leads him to believe that Gatsby acquired his wealth through nefarious and illegal means. After lunch, Nick encounters Jordan, who tells him about Gatsby and Daisy's previous relationship. And Nick agrees to set up a tea date with Daisy where Gatsby will attend without Daisy's knowledge. Initially, Daisy and Gatsby's reunion at Nick's house is awkward, but after Nick returns after leaving them alone for some time, he finds them elated. Gatsby invites Nick and Daisy back to his house, where Daisy is brought to tears by Gatsby's lavish style, his collection of English shirts, and how Gatsby has longed for her. Nick recounts the true story of Gatsby's life and how he came to gain his wealth. One Saturday night, Daisy and Tom attend one of Gatsby's parties. Even though Tom dislikes and is suspicious of Gatsby, but they leave after Tom makes disparaging remarks about Gatsby to Daisy. Nick finds a distraught Gatsby later that evening and reminds him that he cannot recreate the past he once had with Daisy. One afternoon, Tom realizes that Gatsby and Daisy have feelings for one another and decides that the group should drive into the city. While at the Plaza Hotel, Tom becomes confrontational towards Gatsby, accusing, accusing him of lying and bootlegging until eventually Tom forces Gatsby to drive Daisy home. On their way back to Long Island, Tom and Nick learn that Myrtle has been killed in a hit and run, which at first leads Nick to believe that it was Gatsby behind the wheel, until Nick approaches Gatsby and learns that Daisy was the one driving the car. When Nick visits Gatsby the next day, Gatsby relates the story of how he fell in love with Daisy and how the two were to marry after he returned from the war. But instead, she married Tom. After Nick leaves Gatsby, the narrative shifts to Wilson, who concludes that whoever killed Myrtle must have also been her secret lover and determines to seek out the owner of the car that hit her. Wilson finds Gatsby laying on an air mattress in the pool, shoots him, and then shoots himself. 2 years after Gatsby's death, Nick explains the events that occurred after Gatsby's murder, how even more outlandish rumors about him circulated, and how only a few people, including Nick and Gatsby's father, attended Gatsby's funeral, a stark contrast to the swath of attendees at Gatsby's parties. Before Nick leaves New York for good, Tom tells Nick that he was the one who told Wilson that Gatsby was the driver and that he is happy that Gatsby is dead. On Nick's last night in West Egg, he visits Gatsby's mansion and muses about Gatsby's dream and aspirations, as well as the American dream in general. So, students, this was a briefest possible summary of the novel Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now, there are some important characters which I would want you to know. The most important is Nick Carraway, the novel's narrator. He is a young man from Minnesota who, after being educated at Yale and fighting in World War One, goes to the New York City to learn the pawn business. Is honest, tolerant, and inclined to reserve judgment. Nick often serves as a confidant for those with troubling secrets. After moving to Westlake, a fictional area of Long Island that is home to the newly rich, Nick quickly befriends his next door neighbor, the mysterious J. Gatsby. As Desi Bushnan's cousin, he facilitates the rekindling of the romance between her and Gatsby. The Great Gatsby is told entirely through Nick's eyes. His thoughts and perceptions shape and color the whole story. And that is why Nick is an important character because he is the novel's narrator. Then we have J. Gatsby, the little character and protagonist of the novel. This title character and protagonist of the novel, Gatsby, is a fabulously wealthy young man living in a gothic mansion in West Egg. He is famous for the lavish parties he throws every Saturday night, but no one knows where he comes from, what he does, or how he made his fortune. As the novel progresses, Nick learns that Gatsby was born James Gatz on a farm in North Dakota. Working for a millionaire made him decide his life to the achievement of wealth. When he met Daisy while training to be an officer in Louisville, he fell in love with her. Nick also learns that Gatsby made his fortune through criminal activity, as he was willing to do anything to gain the social position he thought necessary to win Daisy. Nick views Gatsby as a deeply flawed man, dishonest and vulgar, whose extraordinary optimism and power to transform his dreams into reality make him great nonetheless. Another important character is Daisy Buchanan. She is Nick's cousin, and she is the woman Gatsby loves. As a young woman in Louisville before the war, Daisy was courted by a number of officers, including Gatsby. She fell in love with Gatsby and promised to wait for him. However, Daisy harbors a deep need to be loved, and when a wealthy, powerful young man named Tom Buchanan asked her to marry him, Daisy decided not to wait for Gatsby after all. Now a beautiful socialite, Daisy lives with Tom across from Gatsby in the fashionable East Egg district of Long Island. She is sardonic and somewhat cynical and behaves superficially to mask her pain at her husband's constant infidelity. Another important character in the novel is Tom Buchanan. He is the husband of Daisy. He is an immensely wealthy man. He was once a member of Nick's social club at Yale. Powerfully beautiful and hailing from a socially solid old family. Tom is an arrogant, hypocritical bully. His social attitudes are laced with racism and sexism, and he never even considered trying to live up to the moral standard he demands from those around him. He has no moral qualms about his own extramarital affair with Myrtle, but when he begins to suspect Daisy and Gatsby of having an affair, he becomes outraged and forces a confrontation. And we have Jordan Baker. Jordan Baker is a Daisy's friend. She's a woman with whom Nick becomes romantically involved during the course of the novel. A competitive golfer, Jordan represents one of the new women of the 1920s, cynical, boyish, and self centered. Jordan is beautiful but also dishonest. She cheated in order to win her first gold tournament and continually bends the truth. The woman character, Myrtle Wilson. She is Tom's lover, whose lifeless husband, George, owns a rundown garage in the Valley of Ashes. Myrtle herself possesses a fierce vitality and desperately looks for a way to improve her situation. Unfortunately for her, she chooses Tom, who treats her as a mere object of his desire. Another character is George Wilson, Myrtle's husband, the lifeless, exhausted owner of a rundown auto shop at the edge of the valleys of ashes. George loves and idealizes Myrtle and is devastated by her affair with Tom. There are other minor characters in the novel, but coming to the theme, the most important theme in the novel is the American dream and its decline in the 1920s. On the surface, The Great Gatsby is a story of the thwarted love between a man and a woman. The main theme of the novel, however, encompasses a much larger, less romantic scope. Though all of its action takes place over a mere few months during the summer of 1922 and set in a circumscribed geographical area in the vicinity of Long Island. The novel is a highly symbolic mediation on the America of 1920s as a whole. In particular, the disintegration of American dream in an era of unprecedented prosperity and material excess. As an American novelist, Fitzgerald portrays the 1920s as an era of decayed social and moral values, evidenced in its overarching cynicism, greed, and empty pursuit of pleasure. The reckless jubilance that led to decadent parties and wild jazz music, epitomized in the Great Gatsby by the opulent parties that Gatsby throws every Saturday night, resulted ultimately in the corruption of the American dream as the unrestrained desire for money and pleasure surpassed more noble goals. When World War I ended in 1918, the generation of young Americans who had fought the war became intensely disillusioned as the brutal carnage that they had just faced made the Victorian social morality of early 20th century America seem like stuffy, empty hypocrisy. The dizzying rise of the stock market in the aftermath of World War led to a sudden, sustained increase in the national wealth and a newfound materialism as people began to spend and consume at unprecedented levels. A person from any social background could potentially make a fortune, but the American aristocracy, that is, families with old wealth, scorned the newly rich industrialists and speculators. Additionally, the passage of the 18th Amendment in 1919, which banned the sale of alcohol, created a thriving underworld designed to satisfy the massive demand for bootleg liquor among rich and poor alike. Fitzgerald positions the characters of the Gatsby as emblems of these social trends. Nick and Gatsby, both of whom fought in World War I, exhibit the newfound cosmopolitanism and cynicism that resulted from the war. Various social climbers and ambitious speculators who attend Gatsby's parties evidence the greedy scamper for wealth. The clash between old money and new money manifests itself in the novel's symbolic geography. East Egg represents the established aristocracy, Westweg the self-made rich. Mayor Wolfsheim and Gatsby's fortune symbolize the rise of organized crime and bootlegging. As Fitzgerald cited, and as Nick explains, the American dream was originally about discovery, individualism, and the pursuit of happiness. In the 1920s depicted in the novel, however, easy money and relaxed social values have corrupted this dream, especially on the East Coast. The main plot line of the novel reflects this assessment, as Gatsby's dream of loving Daisy is ruined by the difference in their respective social statuses. He is resorting to crime to make enough money to impress her, and the rampant materialism that characterizes her lifestyle. Additionally, places and objects in the novel have meaning only because characters instill them with meaning. The eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg best simplify this idea. In Nick's mind, the ability to create meaningful symbols constitutes a central component of the American dream, as early Americans invested their new nation with their own ideals and values. Nick compares the green bulk of American rising from the ocean to the green light at the end of Daisy's talk. Just as Americans have given America meaning through their dreams for their own lives, Gatsby instills Daisy with a kind of idealized perfection that she neither deserves nor possesses. Gatsby's dream is ruined by the unworthiness of its object, just as the American dream in the 1920s is ruined by the unworthiness of its object, that is, money and pleasure. So, dear students, American dream remains the most important theme of this novel, Great Gatsby. So, let us quickly sum up what we have learned so far, and after that, we will continue our counseling on this paper or course in the next counseling session. In today's counseling session, we talked about 20th century American fiction, some of the important to know key concepts and the general background. And after that, We took up the text, Great Gatsby, started with the summary, plot summary of the novel, and moved on to important characters mentioned in the novel, their brief descriptions, and eventually we discussed the most important idea in the novel, that is the American dream, and how Fitzgerald represented this American ideal, that is American dream, in his novel The Great Gatsby. Looking forward to meet you in the next counseling session. Till that time, take care. Bye bye.